Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. It's Pride! Magic Presents Pride is a casual commander event Wizards has brought back this June. You build a commander deck, treating every eligible commander as though it has the partner keyword, because Magic is for everyone. Then you show up at your local game store and play Commander, hopefully against other Pride decks. This year, participants are supposed to receive this sweet foil Gilded Lotus promo, as well as an enamel pin of that lotus. Local game stores can schedule Pride events for June 5th through 14th in these select regions. And since that window ended this past weekend, I hope you made it to one. But if you missed it, check with your local game store to see if they ran a Pride event and if they're planning to run a repeat. And if they aren't, ask them to. WPN locations are always looking for ways to get more players in store after all, and they often have leftover promos to give out. And whether or not you get to play in a store-sanctioned event, you can always play your Pride deck as a Rule 0 deck at any time. Just ask your pod and shuffle up. This event was how I launched my channel last year, so my Monday deck techs during June will all be Pride decks. Anyway, let's get to it. As you see, today our commanders are Alesha, who laughs at fate, and Felothar, Dawn of the Abzan. Notably, this is the Foundation's version of Alesha, rather than the original Alesha who smiles at death. I wanted to choose legends that would be easy for new players to find, and since these two Khans of Tarkir work so well together, I'm pretty pleased with the way the deck turned out. Before we get into it, however, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around my commander, or in this case, commanders. I wanted to show off why these are such cool cards, and why I thought they deserved a deck of their own. So I take about 30 cards and put them toward doing whatever my commanders ask of me. This is our game plan. It's what we do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction pieces. I usually run 1 or 2 sweepers, sometimes more if it would play into the game plan, sometimes none at all, and I almost always keep to a floor of 38 lands. That way I can always hit my land drops and cast my spells and, play commander. So let's talk about our commanders. Alesha, who laughs at fate, is a 2/2 legendary human warrior for 1, a black, and a red. Alesha has first strike, and whenever she attacks, we put a 1/1 counter on her. She also has a raid ability. At the beginning of our end step, if we attacked this turn, doesn't matter with Alesha or with any of our other creatures, we return target creature card with mana value less than or equal to Alesha's power from our graveyard to the battlefield. Then we have Felothar, Dawn of the Abzan. This is a 3/3 legendary, again human warrior, for Abzan mana, a white, a black, and a green. Felothar has trample, and whenever Felothar enters or attacks, we may sacrifice a non-land permanent, and when we do, we put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control. So if you know about these two characters, you already know their link. Alesha was Magic's first canonically trans character, with an awesome accompanying piece of fiction in The Truth of Names. You'll find it linked in this video's description. The Foundation's version of Alesha shows us just how long she remained Khan of the Mardu Horde, still leading warriors into battle even at an advanced age. That was before Khanfall, however, after the timeline shenanigans of Fate Reforged, and a lot has happened since then. Felothar was a soldier in Dromoka's clan, but after the Phyrexian invasion, she participated in the Storm Nexus ritual, calling into being the spirit dragon Baator and helping to overthrow Dromoka. Check this video's description for my Baator deck. Felothar then worked to rebuild the Abzan, of which she now serves as Khan. Like Alesha, she's also a trans woman. Alesha's influence over Magic's character design cannot be overstated, and I believe Felothar is an unambiguous reference to her. That said, these women are very different, with Felothar being slow to act and absolutely unshakable in her integrity, while Alesha is quick and decisive, not so much incautious as she is unworried about her ability to deal with the consequences of her actions. What they share most in common is how they lead through inspiration, motivating those who follow them to do so out of trust and admiration. That's a dominant theme in both their stories, and it's relevant to our deck as well. Felothar ensures our entire team gets stronger whenever we pay the cost of warfare, while Alesha leads the vanguard and helps any who fall behind to find their feet again. They both have relevant combat keywords, and together they build up our forces wide and tall. This is a deck that's heavy on teamwork, so we're running plenty of creatures for that interdependent support, and since we're a 4-color deck, we have a solid emphasis on ramp and fixing to keep our mana flowing and our board broad. Our other mechanical themes are just as interconnected. We care about counters, so we have ways to take advantage of them, from effects that spread them around to effects that reward us for putting them there in the first place. We need bodies to sack to Felidhar's Titan triggers, so we have a breadth of fodder cards that either make tokens or give us value only when they enter, the latter of which make great reanimation targets for Alesha. We have so many ways to get rewarded for our gameplay loop of attacking, sacking, pumping, and reanimating, including death triggers, graveyard filling, burn effects, pump effects, redundant recursion, evasion and protection, and even ways to double dip on our triggers, our counters, and more. This deck has a lot going on, and all of it puts us a stride closer to victory every turn. There's a great moment in the Truth of Names when young Alesha, insulted by another frustrated Mardu warrior, doesn't respond with anger. Instead, the 19-year-old Khan calls out the warrior's friends and peers one by one, each of whom praises him and his bravery even after the warrior himself expressed doubt that he was worthy of such honors. She rounds on him, pulls him by his collar to bring him down to eye level with her, and demonstrates that she possesses something he doesn't. It isn't her pride or her self-assurance, even though those things are true. It's her understanding of who he is. She knows he has value because she's seen it in him, so she makes him feel seen by herself and the rest of the Mardu. That's what's great about Alesha. She knows exactly what medicine treats self-doubt and fear and shame, and it's not because she suffers those maladies, but because those who treat her as such do. For her part, she doesn't have to wonder about her own truth, her own name. In her own words, I know who I am. I am Alesha, like my grandmother before me. She also says, now show me who you are. You'll enjoy this deck if you like a heavily synergistic strategy that rewards a balance of aggressive attacks and careful preparation for future turns, or if you like the idea of seeing the Mardu and Abzan come together to show just how strong we are when we let our deeds prove the truth of our names. So, as usual, this Moxfield list we're going over today is linked in the video's description. At the bottom of it, you will see a considering section, filled with cards that I considered putting in this deck, but ultimately which, for me, didn't make the cut. However, if you have a bigger budget or a smaller one, if you like what I've done and you want to do a little more of it, or if you're interested in one of the things I did in this deck and you want to go more heavily into that direction, the considering section I mentioned is a great place to begin when you build your own Alesha and Felothar deck. So let's get started. We have a lot of sections in this deck, but obviously it's still just 100 cards, so we're going to start with one of our most relevant sections, which is our counters section. These are all cards that give us a way to put counters on our other creatures, whether or not these are creatures themselves. For example, Agent of the Shadow Thieves is actually a legendary enchantment background from Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate. This is 1 and a black for that enchantment that gives all of our commander creatures, which is both of our commanders, whenever this creature attacks a player, if no opponent has more life than that player, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and it gains Indestructible and Deathtouch until end of turn. So this is sweet. It just means as long as we are attacking with either of our commanders, or both of them, if whichever commanders we're attacking with are attacking the opponent that has the most life, or is tied for the most life, then whichever commanders are attacking both get a counter, Deathtouch, and Indestructible. This is terrific for both of our commanders. Alesha has First Strike, so getting bigger is something Alesha's going to do when we attack with her anyway, but giving her First Strike and Deathtouch and Indestructible means we're going to kill anything that blocks us, unless of course it has, Indestructible. And Alesha's not going to die herself, because normally she's going to First Strike with Deathtouch damage and kill it anyway, and if we're being blocked by something that has First Strike or Double Strike itself, we're also indestructible. Even better, Felothar has Trample. So being indestructible protects Felothar. Having Deathtouch and Trample means when we do a single point of damage to whatever's blocking her, the rest of our damage is going to trample over. If we're getting multi-blocked, each of those blockers is going to take a single point of damage, and everything else tramples over because Deathtouch makes any amount of damage, which means 1, lethal. So that's how Deathtouch and Trample work together. So yeah, this is a sweet ability on Agent of the Shadow Thieves that works with both of our commanders. It only works, of course, if we're attacking an opponent that has the most life or is tied for the most life. But if we have, one opponent with 30 life and 2 opponents with 40, we can send Felothar at one of our 40 life opponents and Alesha at the other one if we want to, and they're both going to get this trigger. Yeah, pretty neat. Next, we have Dusk Shell Crawler. There are a lot of different versions of this effect. This is just, I thought, the most cost-effective one. This is 1 and a green for a 0/3 insect that says, when it enters, we put a 1/1 counter on target creature. Sounds good. And each creature we control with a 1/1 counter on it has Trample. This is terrific. We get this in play even before Alesha, let's say, and then we play Alesha and attack with her. she gets her first counter from just attacking, and suddenly she has trample and first strike. Great. Just being able to give all of our board first strike, since Felothar is going to be putting a counter on everything that doesn't die or we don't play after Felothar's attack trigger or interest trigger, we're going to be able to keep putting counters on things, and everything's going to have trample as long as the crawler's in play. And since it has a solid booty, we're going to be able to put our first counter on it from Felothar, make it into a 1/4, and it's going to be a solid blocker for us, even if it doesn't ever attack. But if we get Felothar's triggers several different times, or other triggers from this category of cards, like Duskshell Crawler's own put a 1/1 counter on a target creature trigger, we're going to be able to make this maybe even a threat of its own. Best of all, it's mana value 2, so it's guaranteed if Alesha makes it to the end of turn, after we've attacked at all, Alesha's going to be able to return this to the battlefield if it dies during combat, or if it happens to be the thing that we sacrificed to Felothar for Felothar's Titan trigger. Yeah, just so you know, I'm saying Titan trigger to mean Felothar triggers when she enters and when she attacks. That's like the Titans, like Inferno Titan. So yeah, that's what that means. Next we have Brina the Demagogue, great card from the Commander 21 set originally. This is the original Strixhaven Commander product. 1, a white and a black for a 1/3 legendary bird warlock with flying. Love all of our evasive creatures in this deck because they get so great with all of our counters we're putting on them. And Brina says, whenever a player attacks one of your opponents, that's any player, this Brina will trigger whenever we attack, because of course we're going to attack one of our opponents, as long as we're not attacking, I guess, one of their planeswalkers, or if anyone attacks someone other than us, which means getting this trigger disincentivizes players from attacking us because it incentivizes them to attack each other, so long as the person being attacked has more life than another of our opponents. So this means whenever anyone attacks someone other than us, as long as that person doesn't have the least amount of life, not including us. So if we have, an opponent at 30, an opponent at 35, and an opponent at 40, if anyone attacks the 30 life opponent, whether it's us or someone else, no trigger from Brina. If anyone attacks the 35, then we're good. They'll get this trigger because that player is attacking an opponent of ours, and that opponent has more life than another of our opponents, specifically the 30. Obviously, we get the trigger as well, or they get the trigger either way, if they attack the 40 life player as well. So when all of those conditions are met, whoever's attacking, whether it's us or someone else, will draw a card, and we, no matter who's attacking, get to put 2 1/1 counters on a creature we control. Maybe it's Brina, and Brina becomes a 3/5 flyer for 3. But if we're attacking, we're obviously attacking an opponent, assuming we're not attacking one of their planeswalkers, and we'll draw a card as well. So Brina is repeatable card draw for something we're going to do anyway, probably pumping up either Felothar or, more often, Alesha, since we want to get Alesha out earlier than Felothar, since we get more value out of her attacking sooner. That's what happens when she's the red card. And so Brina can just keep giving us counters and keep giving us cards and give us a lot of value over the course of the game of us doing what we want to do anyway. Next we have Warden of the Grove. This is a card that I'm surprised it costs as little as it does still, because this is a Tarkir Dragonstorm card that goes in so many green decks. This is a great card. It's 2 and a green for a 2/2 Hydra that says at the beginning of your end step, put a 1/1 counter on it. Gets counters on its own, that's fine. And whenever another non-token creature you control enters, that creature endures X, where X is the number of counters on the Warden of the Grove. Endure means we get to choose to either put that many 1/1 counters on that creature, or to make a spirit creature token, a white spirit creature token, with power and toughness, each equal to the number of counters on the Warden of the Grove. So it does not make a 0/0 that puts counters on that spirit, it just makes a spirit that has a set power and toughness there. So, it's not like we could proliferate those counters because it doesn't have them, but still we can proliferate any counters we put on the creature that entered. So this is great. As long as this has counters on it at all, any of our other non-token creatures that comes in gets either counters on it, which sounds good, or makes another creature equal with a power and toughness equal to the number of counters on the Warden that we can then put counters on later, or we can sacrifice to Felothar when Felothar gets her Titan trigger. Either way, So Warden of the Grove does everything we need for us, especially since it puts counters on itself at the end step, but also we can put counters on it from Felothar and just get more and more and more value out of it. Love this card. Next, we have Sela's Rune Knight. I'm not a Final Fantasy guy, so I don't know who this person is. Let me know in the comments if you are a Sela's fan. All I know is that Sela's is a 4/4 legendary human wizard knight for 1, a red, a white, and a black. Is that called a red mage? I do not know that. It has this trigger. When Sela's enters, we can discard any number of cards and then draw that many cards +1. So Sela's replaces herself when she comes in, because we can discard 0 cards and draw 0 + 1, so we've cast Sela's, and so yeah. But also replaces any other cards we have to discard. Why would we want to discard cards in this deck? Well, I mean, card selection is already a thing. Just rummaging away our cards to get more cards is good. But Alesha reanimates something every turn that we've attacked, and she makes it to our end step. So, and Alesha's also getting bigger every turn when she attacks, or when Felothar gets a trigger and we put counters on Alesha as well. So Sela's gives us a way to put our creatures in the graveyard so that we can cheat them into play with Alesha. That's one of the sections in our game plan that we're going to go through later on, our graveyard section. Cards that put other cards in the graveyard. So yes, we could be discarding lands we don't need, obviously, but it's usually meant to use Sela's ability to put creatures in our graveyard that we can get back later. Seems good. In addition, whenever one or more other creatures we control enter, it does not even say non-token. If one of them entered from a graveyard or was cast from a graveyard, we put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control. So this is great for Alesha in 2 ways. We get to put creatures in the graveyard, and then we get to reanimate them, and when we reanimate them, if they entered from the graveyard, like they will with Alesha, we get to put a 1/1 counter on all of our creatures, including Sela's, Alesha, and whatever creature came in. Great. Next up is Felothar Retreat. Just a simple way for us to get more counters and more tokens, which are good sacrifice fodder. For 3 and a white, we have an enchantment with a landfall trigger. Whenever a land we control enters, we can either make a 2/2 white cat beast creature token, and they look like this, or we put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control, and they gain vigilance until end of turn. Vigilance on top of First Strike and Trample for our commanders is already good. The extra counter is already good. Being able to make this beast and then sacrifice it to Felothar so that we don't have to sacrifice one of the creatures we've already got in play. Maybe we're already building up our creatures with plenty of counters, so we don't want to have to reanimate them with Alesha. We would rather reanimate something that we've discarded with Sela's, for example. Felothar Retreat, much like Warden of the Grove, gives us counters and tokens, so it gives us everything we need. Halana and Elena, Partners. This card is terrific. It's great for this month. Obviously, happy Pride, everyone. And check out this channel in a couple of weeks for maybe a Halana and Elena deck. We'll see. Or look at my past Pride decks playlist, and you'll see the way I did Halana and Elena before. Yeah. But what does this card do? It's 2, a red and a green, for a 2/3 legendary human ranger with First Strike and Reach. Why does it have Reach? Because it's a ranger. Got a bow. Why does it have First Strike? I guess because of a sword, either way. And it says, at the beginning of combat on our turn, we put a number of 1/1 counters on another target creature we control equal to Halana and Elena's power, and that creature gains haste until end of turn. That haste is something people always forget with Halana and Elena Partners, and it's always powerful for us. But being able to put a number of counters on something equal to this creature's power is so great in a deck that puts counters on all of our creatures. Halana and Elena are just going to get more powerful themselves, and therefore put more counters on other things at the same time. The only thing we can't do is put these counters on Halana and Elena themselves, because it says another target creature. But this can be something great to put on Alesha, to put on Felothar, whatever we may need. Excellent. Next, we have Genova, Ancient Calamity. Again, check the video's description for my Genova deck. It was a request that someone made a few months ago, and it was pretty fun. But it does good work in our deck as well. So this is 2, a black and a green, for a 1/5 legendary alien that says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a number of 1/1 counters equal to Genova's power on up to 1 other target creature. So pretty similar to Halana and Elena, except that it starts with only 1 power. So as we build it up, it's going to get more counters similarly. And when we do that, that creature becomes a mutant in addition to its other types. Interesting. We only have one actual mutant-typed creature, like printed the word mutant in the type line in this deck. So why would it matter that we make this card into a mutant? Well, whenever a mutant we control dies during our turn, we draw cards equal to its power. How can we have a mutant die during our turn? Maybe by sacrificing it to Felothar when Felothar enters or attacks? And then we just get to draw cards equal to its power, which is going to be bigger thanks to Jenova making it a mutant with a counter in the first place, or multiple counters maybe. So yeah, Jenova is a repeatable way for us to buff up our sacrificable creatures and draw cards off of them. Seems great. We put a counter on one of these cat beasts that Felothar Retreat gave us. Then we sack that to Felothar when Felothar attacks, and we draw 3 cards. That seems great. Since Jenova triggers at the start of combat, we're going to get to put that counter on the creature and give it that mutant type right then. Then we attack with Felothar. Felothar sacrifices the creature that we put the counter on with Jenova, and now we get more cards in hand, and we also get Felothar's trigger, putting a counter on everything. So it's like we took the one counter, or maybe more, that Jenova put on that creature and turned it into a counter for everything. We've got a couple of ways to do that, as we'll see a little bit more of soon. Next up, we're going to talk about Lenore. This is Lenore Autumn Sovereign. This is the face commander from the Midnight Hunt Humans Coven deck. So we'll talk about this. 2, a green and a white for an 0/4 legendary human noble with Coven. Coven is an ability that cares about having 3 or more creatures with different powers. So Lenore says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a 1/1 counter on up to 1 target creature you control. It says up to, so we don't have to do any, but we probably will. So this is a very similar trigger to what Jenova has, it just doesn't turn that creature into a mutant. And then, as part of the same trigger, if we then control 3 or more creatures with different powers, we draw a card. So Lenore, without even having to sacrifice it, or without us having to sacrifice creatures, can give us a counter every turn and an extra card every turn. Great. Love Lenore. Next up is Mazarek, Crawl Death Priest, a terrific card that I'm grateful was recently reprinted, so it's so cheap. It was in the Secrets of Strixhaven Commander deck, it was in one of the Edge of Eternity Commander decks, just a cool card. 3, a green and a black for a 2/2 legendary insect shaman with flying that says whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Each. So if Felothar sacrifices a creature, Mazarek will see that too, and Felothar will put a counter on everything, and then Mazarek will put a counter on everything. Technically Mazarek does first, I guess, because we're sacrificing it to Felothar. No, I guess Felothar's resolves completely first. There you go. In any case, we're getting a counter on everything, and getting another counter on everything, other than, of course, the sacrificed permanent. So yeah, Mazarek is a 2/2 flyer for 5, but quickly gets quite big, as does the rest of our board. Next up is Smile at Death. This is a great card, obviously, reference to Alesha. You can see her right here, it's her epithet. Awesome. I'm really excited to put this card in the deck. I just really think it's neat. That's 3 and double white for an enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep, return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and put a 1/1 counter on each of them. So if Alesha is not reanimating things for us, well, this enchantment sure will. We can get 2 cards out of our graveyard, including Alesha herself, rather than maybe putting her back in the command zone. So Smile at Death, I believe in this deck, can get like 32 of the different creatures we have in our deck, including Alesha herself, back from the graveyard, since we have so many creatures that start off with a low power. So this can really be a nice way for us to get those creatures back, and we put little counters on them, to make them slightly stronger. Great. Finally, in this section, we have one of our Wraths. This is from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles set, and it's called The Last Ronin. It is a saga. If you haven't seen sagas before, the way they work is when they first come in, and at the start of our first main phase on subsequent turns, we put a lore counter on it, and we trigger the ability with a number equal to the number of lore counters we have. And then once the last ability has left the stack, we sacrifice the saga. So when it first comes in, we, Chapter 1, destroy all creatures. Sounds good. Just a straight up Wrath. Sometimes you need them. Chapter 2, again, start of our pre-combat main phase on our next turn, we will mill 4 cards, and when we do, we return target creature card from our graveyard to our hand. So we get to mill 4, probably putting some creatures in the graveyard, and we get to raise dead. Seems good. Maybe we bring something back that we destroyed. You never know. And then Chapter 3 is whenever a creature you control attacks alone this turn, we put 3 1/1 counters on it, and it gains trample, lifelink, and indestructible until end of turn. So a great way for us to rebuild after that board wipe. If we're already, playing things out, we've got something back in our hand for that second turn, maybe we cast it on this second turn, and then turn 3, we attack with just one thing. Maybe it's even Felothar, so we can bump up the entire team, and Felothar becomes a 6/6, trample, lifelink, and indestructible until end of turn. Cool. So that covers our counters section. Now let's take a look at a little bit of a bigger section, which is our fodder section. This includes all of our token generators and all of our cards that we want to sacrifice, or that we're able to sacrifice to Felothar, and then get back with Alesha. We're going to start with a classic, it's Stitcher Supplier. A single black for a 1/1 zombie that says when it enters or dies, we mill 3 cards. That's all it is. We play this for 1, put 3 cards in our bin. We are running 42 cards in our deck, which means 40 cards beyond, it's our commander plus 40 cards. So if Stitcher Supplier's coming in, there's 39 cards left in our library that are creature cards, assuming they're not filling up our hand. You understand how the math works. It's a lot of cards in our graveyard, so we've got a pretty good chance of having this mill at least 1 creature that we can easily bring back with Alesha, whether or not this is entering, dying, or it's the thing we're bringing back with Alesha. Good. Studious First Year. I saw this card when it first was previewed in the, at time of recording, recent Secrets of Strixhaven deck set, and I was like, oh, that's kind of a cool card. I did not expect to be putting it in so many decks because it's so good. This is a single green mana for a 1/1 bear wizard, bear with me, that says it enters prepared, and that's all. Enters prepared means while it's prepared, we can cast its prepare spell from exile, or cast a copy of it rather, and then doing so unprepares it. That's fine. And its prepare spell is just rampant growth. The classic 1 and a green sorcery, search for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So the idea behind Studious First Year is we play it probably before we get out Felothar and before we get out Alesha. Then we play Felothar, sacrifice the first year. It's in the graveyard, attack with Alesha, who's not just bigger because we're attacking with her, but bigger because Felothar had us sacrifice the first year and then put a counter on everything. And so with her first strike, maybe she's not getting blocked, but either way, she's certainly, or almost certainly, not dying. So then we go to our end step. This is only a 1 mana creature, so at the very least, we can bring it back with our Alesha trigger. Then next turn, since this enters prepared, we can rampant growth with it. Maybe for the first time, maybe for the second time, maybe for the 5th time. Just keep having a nice mana sink that gives us rampant growth, which is still a solid spell in Commander, over and over and over, and something that has no value to us beyond being like a chump blocker once we've cast rampant growth. Even if we haven't cast rampant growth, this is still a great card for us to sack as just sacrifice fodder to Felothar and then get it back, and it comes with, a card stapled to it. Great. Next up is Conclave Mentor. This is a green and a white for a 2/2 Centaur Cleric that says if 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, that many +1/+1/+1 counters are put on that creature instead. So, hardened scales. We get to, every time we put counters on things, we put an extra counter beyond however many we would have put. If Helena and Alena partners are putting 2 counters on something, Conclave Mentor will say, oh, put 3 instead. If Felothar is sacrificing a creature, that isn't the Conclave Mentor, of course, and is putting a counter on everything, Conclave Mentor says, put 2 counters on everything. It's very cool. Just a strong ability on top of a 2/2 body that when it dies, we gain life equal to its power. So even though it's not the best thing to sacrifice to Felothar, because when we do, we lose out on its ability to be on the battlefield when Felothar puts those counters on things, we can do that. And if we've gotten counters on it by this point, maybe it's got 2 counters, let's say, because it got one instance of Felothar's ability putting counters on everything, which would mean putting 2 counters on everything, which means this is a 4/4. Next turn, we sacrifice this to Felothar, gain 4 life, put counters on things, and we can easily bring it back with Alesha. Next up, we have Diadron, Synthesis Amalgam. I have a commander deck for this as well, if you can believe it, from way back when Edge of Eternities was the most recent set in Standard, and I think it's so fun. This is such a cool card with a cool backstory, and I just think it's neat. So Diadrin, Synthesis Amalgam, is an X green and a white 0/1 legendary artifact creature construct with trample that enters with a number of counters on it equal to the amount of mana spent to cast it. So it's going to be 2 mana even if X is 0, if we're casting it for just a green and a white, meaning we're getting a 2 mana 2/3 trample, which is okay. If we're reanimating this with Alesha, then it's just an 0/1 since we're spending no mana to cast it. When that's fine, because whenever we attack, we can remove a +1/+1 counter from each of 2 creatures we control, which means a total of 2 counters, but they have to be from different creatures. And if we do that, we make a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token, and we draw a card. So we can use these counters that Felothar is putting on everything, that we're putting on Alesha every time we attack with her, that all of these other abilities are putting on things, get rid of just 2 of them simply by attacking. And then we get an additional 2/2 and a card. So check this out. Imagine Alesha already has 1 counter on her. We have Alesha, Felothar, and Diadrin in play. We can attack with Alesha and attack with Felothar as well. We stack our 3 triggers so that Alesha's trigger resolves first, Diadrin's trigger resolves second, and Felothar's trigger resolves third. Alesha puts a counter on herself, so now we have 2 counters on her. Diadrin resolves, and we remove one of those counters from Alesha, who we just put that counter on, and then a counter from anywhere else, maybe Diadrin itself. When we do that, we draw a card and we make a robot. Then we resolve Felothar's trigger, sacrifice that robot, and put a counter on everything. Now we've gotten that counter back on Alesha that she just got on her, and back on Diadrin, assuming we took it off of Diadrin, which just lost that counter. So we've cost ourselves 0 counters, put a counter on everything else, and gotten a card. So the play of this can really help us throughout the game, using our counters for more than just the fact that they are power and toughness. We can make our hand bigger, make our board bigger, make it wider, just great. And if Diadrin gets big enough, Diadrin has trample. That's not nothing. Just a very cool little bot. Next up is Servondum Sunstar Exemplar. Amazingly, I have a Servondum deck as well. All of these decks are linked in the video's description, and yeah, go check them out. So anyway, we have a 2/2 Legendary Human Knight for a white and a black with Vigilance and Menace. So 2/2 Vigilance Menace for just 2 is already pretty great, I think. Servondum says, whenever another creature we control dies or is put into exile, we put a 1/1 counter on Servondum and we gain a life. A little bit of an incidental life gain. Putting a little counter on Servondum is pretty good. But think about this. One of the best ways we have for our creatures to die is for us to sacrifice them to Felothar. When Felothar sacrifices a creature, we're going to put a counter on everything, which means Servondum is going to see that creature die and get a counter from that, in addition to getting a counter from Felothar, meaning Servondum is now a 4/4 Menace Vigilance because we just had 1 creature die. That's in addition to all of our other creatures getting a counter from Felothar. The reason that's important, making Servondum into a 4/4, is because when Servondum dies or is put into exile while its power is 4 or greater, we get to destroy up to 1 target non-land permanent. So that means Servondum is on the board when Felothar sacrifices something. Servondum becomes a 4/4. Next turn, Felothar sacrifices Servondum, and we destroy something. We go to the end step, and because we attacked that turn, Alesha triggers, puts Servondum back into play. Next turn, we sacrifice something other than Servondum, and we've started the loop again. With this, we get to not just have Servondum be fodder for us to sacrifice to Felothar, but it means that every other turn, we're getting a free destroy a non-land permanent, which is, Stroke of Midnight, or any number of effects. I'm thinking it's Emergency Eject, which is the thing that I like to go to as my, in white, remove a non-land permanent sort of thing. So yeah, Servandum gets value off of all of our other deaths, gives us life in the process, and can be part of this great loop, and can just get bigger from Felothar, and it has Vigilance and Menace. We can be attacking with Servandum as well if we're not sacrificing him. Very cool. Next we have Anam Pakal, Thousandth Moon. This is 1, a red, and a white, for a 1/2 legendary human soldier from Lost Caverns of Ixalan that says whenever we attack with one or more non-gnome creatures. So, Alesha and Felothar, neither of them are gnomes. That seems good. When we do that, we put a 1/1 counter on Anam Pakal and then create a number of 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens that are tapped and attacking equal to the total number of counters on Anam Pakal. So, let's say we have this and anything else in play with Felothar. We attack with Felothar. Felothar is not a gnome, so we get a trigger from Anam Pakal since we've attacked with something that's a non-gnome. But we also have a trigger from Felothar. What we do is we let Felothar's trigger resolve first, sacrifice that anything else that I mentioned, some non-land permanent, which puts a counter on all of our creatures, which includes Anam Pakal. Then we have Anam Pakal's trigger resolve, which will put an additional counter on Anam Pakal, and we make 2 gnomes that are both tapped and attacking. If those gnomes survive, they are a thing we sacrifice to Felothar next turn. So Anam Pakal makes fodder for us, but that fodder is based on the number of counters on Anam Pakal, which is already getting bigger and bigger and bigger as Felothar continues to trigger. Yeah, just a very nice way to get this going. Yeah, and something else that's true about all of our token-based fodder, if we were to go to our next turn and maybe our opponent has a really big board and we don't want to risk any of our creatures, maybe we just attack with a single one of these gnomes. That will not trigger Anam Pakal, because Anam Pakal requires us to attack with a non-gnome in order to trigger. And of course it doesn't trigger Felothar because Felothar is not attacking. Maybe it doesn't trigger anything, in fact, until our end step, when Alesha triggers because we attacked. We didn't have to attack with Alesha. And Alesha, since we attacked, even if that gnome was blocked and killed, we declared it as an attacker, so we did attack that turn, so we get her raid trigger, and we get to reanimate something from the graveyard. Neat. Next up, we have Horizon Explorer, a really cool addition to Magic from Edge of Eternity's Commander. This is 2 and a green for a 2/4 Insect Scout that says lands you control enter untapped. This is a 4-color deck with a not very high budget. So our mana base is pretty budget as well, as are all the mana bases for all of my decks on this channel. Which means we have a number of cards that are in our mana base that can come in untapped, but sometimes they're going to be coming in tapped, and that's just how it goes. With Horizon Explorer, not so much. Even more important, we have a bunch of rampant growth style effects, like Studious First Year, which just gives us actual factual rampant growth. Rampant growth puts cards into play tapped. Horizon Explorer says, no, it'll come in untapped. So we get to have it come in untapped, and rampant growth becomes a better Nature's Lore, I guess, or maybe not as good Nature's Lore, but it hits any land. So yeah, Horizon Explorer can really help us out with our lands coming in untapped, but also, whenever we attack a player, we make a lander token. We're going to be attacking players left and right in this game. A lander token is a Wayfarer's Bauble as a token. It's an artifact with plus pay 2, tap and sack it, 2 rampant growth. Search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So this is sweet because Horizon Explorer doesn't have to be the creature that's attacking in order for us to get this trigger. We just have to attack a player. So, as I was saying with Anam Pakal, we attack with Felothar. When we do, Felothar is going to trigger, and so is Horizon Explorer. So we stack it so that Horizon Explorer's trigger resolves first. We make a lander token. Then we let Felothar's trigger resolve, sacrifice the lander token since it's a non-land permanent, and we put a counter on each of our creatures, and we haven't had to risk any of our creatures to do so. Hopefully we also attacked with Alesha, so Alesha gets an additional counter from her own attack trigger beyond just the one that Felothar put on everything. So sweet. We don't get to use the lander token in that case to rampant growth ours, but still. What's nice is, if we didn't need to use the lander token, or we would have rather sacrificed a creature or something else to Felothar, then we have a lander token that we can crack whenever we want, maybe on our opponent's turns, our opponent to the right's instep before our next turn, and that mana is going to come in untapped, and our opponents are going to forget about this ability and expect us to say, oh, well, They've got 1 mana open, but they don't have any good removal spells with that. So we say, well, we've actually got 3 mana open. We're going to crack our lander token, put something into play. Maybe this is a better example. They've got 3 mana open, but we know they're saving it for that lander token. So we crack the lander token, get a basic land into play untapped, thanks to the Horizon Explorer, and we actually have 2 mana open after that, rather than just the 1. Yeah, maybe that's not a scenario that plays out a lot at your tables, but it is something that I think about when I'm watching my opponents play and see what kind of, mana they have for counterplay, and I definitely would forget that their rampant growth would put their land into play untapped. So next up is Lauren of the Third Path. This card is going up in price slowly. I want them to start reprinting this in more precons because it's my favorite Reclamation Sage. Lauren is 2 and a white for a 2/1 legendary human artificer with vigilance that when she enters, we destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. So we get a free naturalize, or free, I guess she's white, so disenchant built into her. That's pretty good. And when she's no longer summoning sick, we can tap her, and we and target opponent each draw a card. So that's pretty good. Usually we can use this politically, we can make deals with opponents, but at the very least, this is us, for the cost of giving another opponent a card, we get an extra card every turn. Thanks, Lauren. And if she dies, we can reanimate her with Alesha, if Alesha has power 3 or greater, which Alesha will after her first attack, since she puts a counter on herself, and we can get Lauren back and Rec Sage something else. Next up, we have Ophiomancer, recently reprinted in Secrets of Strixhaven Commander. This is 2 and a black for a 2/2 human shaman that says at the beginning of each upkeep, if you control no snakes, make a 1/1 black snake creature token with Deathtouch. So maybe it's the start of our upkeep, we don't have any snakes, so we make a snake. We go to combat, attack with Felothar, sacrifice our snake, everything gets a counter, including the Ophiomancer. Go to our next opponent's upkeep, we don't have any snakes, so we make a snake, because this is each upkeep. We're always going to have a 1/1 snake by the time someone draws a card, if we didn't already have one. So being able to have a 1/1 Deathtoucher, that's just a solid deterrent for our opponents attacking us, since we know that as long as they're not attacking with something that is indestructible, we're definitely going to be able to trade with whatever they attack with. So yeah, just a nice way to always have a little bit of fodder for ourselves to put counters on things, as well as we can attack with that snake too. That seems pretty good. It's probably not getting blocked, so maybe we've pumped it up with Felothar. Yeah, it's a possibility. Next is Scurry Oak. Goes great in this deck. 2 and a green for a 1/2 Treeful with Evolve. Evolve means when we have a creature enter, doesn't even matter if it's a non-token creature, as long as that creature has greater power or toughness than Scurry Oak, we put a counter on the Scurry Oak. So if we have a 2/2 enter, it becomes a 2/3 since it gets a counter. Then we have a 3/3 enter. Well, 3 is not higher than its toughness at this point, but it is still higher than its power, so it gets another counter, becomes a 3/4. And whenever 1 or more 1/1 counters are put on Scurry Oak, we can make a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. So this is going to happen whenever it puts counters on itself with Evolve, or whenever we put counters on it from one of our many counter putter effects, especially Felothar. Felothar saying, oh, we've got a squirrel in play, I'm going to attack with Felothar, sack the squirrel, put a counter on everything, Scurry Oak gets a counter on it, we now have the squirrel back. So it was for basically no cost, but we got all of our triggers, including like a Mazarek trigger that we sacrificed a permanent, so we put an additional counter on everything, which will put another squirrel into play, and so forth. Scurry Oak really does a lot of work for us. And again, it's only 3 mana, so it's easy to bring back with Alesha. Next up is Twilight Diviner. Oh, this card, I put this in a bunch of decks because it's just great for us. 2 and a black for a 3/3 Elf Cleric that when it enters, we get to Surveil 2. So that's solid card selection, and it gives us the ability to put creatures in our graveyard if we wish to, in order to reanimate with Alesha. But when we reanimate with Alesha, Twilight Diviner's helping us a lot, because whenever 1 or more other creatures we control enter, if they entered or were cast from a graveyard, so for example, if they entered because we reanimated them with Alesha at our end step, we make a token that's a copy of one of those creatures, but only once each turn. That's fine, we're only going to do this once every turn. It's sometimes the case that we're getting multiple triggers from Alesha during our end step, but usually we're only getting 1 anyway. So the idea of saying, we have our Ophiomancer in the graveyard. We go to our end step, Alesha triggers, we get our Twilight Diviner to see us bring back our Ophiomancer. Now we have 2 Ophiomancers. Now, we're only going to make 1 snake from 2 Ophiomancers because they'll both go on the stack. One will make a snake, the second one will see that we have a snake and it won't make one. But it's nice to just have the 2. And we can always sacrifice that token as fodder itself to Felothar if we need to. Or we get 2 Scurry Oaks back into play. They both enter. We have any way to put counters on them. We put counters on both of them. We make squirrels. They both make squirrels. We're doing great. So yeah, Twilight Diviner can help us in so many different ways. Even if we're getting back a creature that is legendary. For example, maybe we've got Servandum coming back. We have a token copy of Servandum enter. We legend rule away the token copy. The original one sees a creature die, and we get a counter on Servandum and gain a life. So we're all set. Great. We've seen Warden of the Grove. Lets our creatures that are non-tokens endure when they enter, which could put counters on them, or could make token creatures of our own, those spirit creature tokens, which themselves are good fodder. Next up is Windcrag Siege. This card was awesome for me at the Tarkir Dragonstorm pre-release. 1 red and a white for an enchantment that says, when it enters, we choose either Mardu or Jeskai. Let's talk about Jeskai first. Jeskai is the reason it's in this section, in fact. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, make a 1/1 red goblin creature token. It gains lifelink and haste until end of turn. This can do a lot of work. The ability for us to, every turn, make a token that we can sacrifice to Felothar without having to throw away any of our other creatures is so strong. It just means we don't get to use that goblin's lifelink and haste, which is fine. However, we can also get our Alesha triggers with it in the same way that I was talking about with Anna Bakal. Maybe our opponent's boards are too scary for us to want to attack into and risk our creatures, so at the start of our upkeep, we've made a 1/1 goblin. It attacks with haste. Maybe it does some damage. We get that lifelink from it being 1/1, and then we go to our end step, and we did attack that turn, so Alesha's raid trigger goes off. That's all pretty great. But generally, that's not what we're doing. There are times where you might choose Jeskai, but for the most part, you're going to choose Mardu, because Mardu doubles our attack triggers. If a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent we control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. That's amazing. So this will not trigger Alesha, because this is Alesha. It will not trigger Alesha's reanimate trigger, her raid trigger. But if she attacks, she's got an attack trigger that puts a counter on her, so that'll trigger twice, and we'll get to put 2 counters on her. Felothar is going to attack, or Felothar rather. Pardon me, keep thinking Felothar. When Felothar attacks, we can sacrifice something, and if we do, we put a counter on all of our creatures. And then we get to do that again, since that triggered ability will be on the stack twice. Which means we do have to sacrifice a second thing, but we'd also get to put a second counter on everything else that remains, all of our creatures, that is. So yeah, Windcrag Siege is one of our extras in this deck, in that it gives us an extra attack trigger whenever we have an attack trigger of one of our creatures. Sweet. So we've got Felothar Retreat. We've already seen that. It makes tokens. In addition to putting counters on our things, we can make tokens, which are good fodder for us. Rampant Rejuvenator. This is a card that I was like, I don't know, maybe this card is okay. It might work in our deck. No, this card is cracked in our deck. It's so good. This is a 0/0 Plant Hydra that enters with 2 1/1 counters on it for 3 and a green. 3 and a green, remember that amount, because that's the cost of Explosive Vegetation, which is to say, double Rampant Growth. And when this creature dies, search your library for X basic land cards, where X is this creature's power, put them on the battlefield and shuffle. So since this comes in with 2 counters on it, if this enters and immediately dies, we've paid 3 and a green to find 2 basics and put them on the battlefield and shuffle, which is not Explosive Vegetation, because Explosive Vegetation puts those lands on the battlefield tapped. This does not say tapped. So we get to pay 3 and a green, put this into play as a 2/2, go to combat, attack with Felothar, sacrifice the Rampant Rejuvenator, and thereby put a counter on everything else, including Felothar and Alesha and all of our other creatures. And we get a Rampant Rejuvenator trigger that puts 2 of our basics into play untapped. So we've ramped ourselves in an immediately useful way for the cost of 2 mana to activate Felothar. Then we go to our end step, and if Alesha has attacked as well, that means Alesha's attacked, so Alesha's got 1 counter. Felothar is triggered, so that means Alesha's got 2 counters, which means Alesha has a power of 4, so we can get the Rampant Rejuvenator back right away. If we choose not to sacrifice this. Maybe we sacrifice something else because we want this to be bigger from the counters that Felothar puts on things. That means when we do sacrifice this, its power was bigger, so it's going to get more untapped basics into play for us. This is a terrific card for us to recur over and over and to use for our ramp effects. And it's a creature until then. What kind of creature would you want that ramps you? Something like a Sakura Tribe Elder? We've got that in here too. You'll see it soon. But the point is, this is sort of like the bigger version of Sakura Tribe Elder and helps us so well in this deck. Next up, Ravenous Chupacabra. Just a straight up Chupa. This is 2 and double black for a 2/2 Beast Horror that says when it enters, we destroy target creature an opponent controls. Just straight up, it's better than Doomblade. It can kill black creatures, but it's just 4 mana for a 2/2 that kills something. And it's 4 mana, so it's easy for Alesha to bring back and kill something again during our end step. It's also 2 power, so it's great for Smile at Death, that reanimator enchantment that we saw earlier, to bring back during our upkeep. So whether this comes back in during our upkeep and kills something, or during our prior turn's end step from Alesha and kills something, we can then sacrifice it again to Felothar, put a counter on all of our other creatures, including Felothar and Alesha themselves, go to our end step with Alesha, and bring it right back and kill something else. Great. Next up, obviously, you gotta run Solemn Simulacrum in a deck like this. 4 generic mana for a 2/2 artifact creature golem that when it enters, we may Rampant Growth. Search for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. And when it dies, we can draw a card. So it's got a great mana value for returning with Alesha. It's got a great power for returning with Smile at Death. It ramps us, it draws us cards, it comes back with Alesha, ramps us again. We can sacrifice it to Felothar, draw another card. Great. Love the Sad Robot. Next up, this is a bit of a pet card of mine, but it's so good in this deck. We've already seen a couple of different creatures, Ravenous Chupacabra, Rampant Rejuvenator, Solemn Simulacrum, that are all 4 mana 2/2s, or 4 mana 2 power creatures. How about the Earth King? This is from the Avatar The Last Airbender set. It's a 2/2 legendary human noble ally for 3 and a green. But when it enters, it makes a 4/4 green bear creature token. So this is 4 mana for 6 power and toughness over 2 bodies. And whenever one or more creatures we control with power 4 or greater attack, we search our library for up to that many basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So that many is the number of creatures we have attacking with power 4 or greater. These are called ferocious creatures, which includes this bear token if it's the next turn and this is able to attack. So if we have Felothar attack and it's power 4, if we have Alesha attack and she's power 4, we have any of our other creatures, including this bear token attack, we're going to get a trigger from the Earth King and get to put that many basic lands into play, whether or not the Earth King remains on the battlefield after those attacks. Because we can have this go on the stack at the same time Felothar's ability goes on the stack, we sacrifice the Earth King, and then during our end step, Alesha will trigger since we attacked, and return the Earth King to the battlefield, since, again, only 4 mana, and we could do the same thing, obviously, with Smile at Death, since it has 2 power, and the bear it makes is not legendary. Even though it's Bosco, if you know the story for Avatar, it's a non-legendary 4/4. So we just get an additional 4/4 when we bring the Earth King back that we can use to attack again next turn, ramp ourselves even more. Yeah, just very cool in this deck. Next up, Combustible Gear Hulk. This card is crazy in this deck. This is a 6/6 artifact creature construct with first strike for 4 and double red. So red is our least populous color, but we have plenty of representation of it in our mana pool because we want to cast Alesha on turn 3. So yeah, it says when this creature enters, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. This could come with a free Ancestral Recall. And if that player doesn't, we mill 3 cards. Then this creature deals damage to that player equal to the total mana value of those cards. So either we get a free 3 cards in hand, or we get to put 3 cards in our graveyard, which we've already talked about can be great for us since we might be putting creatures in our graveyard we can reanimate with Alesha. And we're burning our opponent based on the mana value of all those creatures all those cards that went in our graveyard. Maybe we hit 3 lands in our graveyard, and that's a shame. But our opponent won't know that probably, when the Combustible Gear Hulk comes in. At that point, we then have either gotten value out of our graveyard, value out of our burn effect, or value in our hand with those 3 cards, and we have a 6/6 first striker we can attack with as much as we want. And when it dies, Alesha getting up to 6 power is not hard. Being able to reanimate this and have our opponents have to do this again during our end step, pretty good. Especially if we know Alesha is going to survive combat, or we have a pretty good suspicion at least, and her power is already 5 or 6. So that when we attack with her, it'll go up to 6. So we could just sacrifice the Gear Hulk to Felothar, ensure it's in the graveyard, and get this trigger again once it comes back. Great. Next up, Massacre Worm. This is our other Wrath in the deck. It's 3 and triple black, but I know you're thinking, we've got a 4-color deck, right? Well, the only color that our 2 commanders share is black, so while it's not our most represented color, it is well stocked in our mana base to be able to get black pips. So this is a 6/5 Phyrexian Worm that says when it enters, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn. So this is a sweeper for small creatures, for X2s or smaller, which is totally fine. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. That's drain or burn, whichever way you want to look at it in this deck. I think we've tagged it as burn just to give all of our, similar effects the same name. In any case, our opponent's creatures are going to be dying because we're going to be attacking them with our trampling and first striking commanders, and especially when they are smaller. But it's very cool to be able to play the Massacre Worm, get this ability, ensure that everything our opponents had that was an X2 or smaller is dead, and everything else is 2 smaller power and toughness, so it's easier for us to attack into it. Then we go to combat, Felothar attacks, triggers, and we sack the Massacre Worm. If, at the end of turn, Alesha is still alive and has a power of 6 or greater, we bring the Massacre Worm back, and our opponent's creatures get an additional -2/-2s. It's the same turn. So now everything that was an X4 or smaller is dead, and everything that died, they lose 2 life. It could be that we even kill things that have a bigger power than 4, because maybe they blocked with some things and there's damage marked on those creatures. So the -2/-2 that happens the second time kills those creatures. Yeah. Plus, Massacre Worm is a 6/5 sitting on the battlefield, still doing this, which will trigger during anyone's turn. If maybe opponent A attacks opponent B and some of their creatures trade, those creatures do die, so we are going to drain them for that. So yeah, just a solid use in this deck. And also, what a nice smile. All right, so that is the second to last. We do have one more in our fodder section. It's another Phyrexian. No, it's not. This is from Avishkar. This is the Noxious Gear Hulk. It's 4 and double black for a 5/4 artifact creature construct with menace that says when it enters, we may destroy another target creature, and if a creature is destroyed this way, we gain life equal to its toughness. So another little bit of life gain, but another great way for us to recur this. If we get Alesha up to 6 mana, we just bring this back at the end step, once we've maybe sacrificed it to Felothar, or it's died in combat, even though it's a 5/4 menace, and we can get its trigger again. Pretty good. And that covers our fodder section. And so we do have other sections of this deck, particularly supplements to the big part of our game plan, and we're going to go into all the intricacies of that. Oh, hey, before I go on, do you maybe feel like liking the video? Nice. I'm just kidding. You don't have to like the video just because I asked you to. I appreciate you being here anyway. Thank you for joining me. In any case, before we go on to those supplemental parts of our deck, we're going to talk about these parts of our deck that support our game plan, starting with our card advantage section, which as usual I've tagged as draw. It doesn't mean all these cards do the draw a card action. It just gives us access to cards in other ways. So we have Stocking the Pantry. This is a single green enchantment that says whenever we put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature we control, we put a supply counter on Stocking the Pantry. Supply counters don't have an inherent mechanical meaning, they're just used by Stocking the Pantry. But notably, this says whenever you put 1 or more 1/1 counters on a creature. So if we put 3 counters on one of our creatures, we only get 1 supply counter for that. But it says on a creature you control. So this will trigger for each of our creatures. So if we have 5 creatures in play and Felothar sacrifices 4 of them, or sacrifices 1 of them rather, to put a counter on the other 4, including Felothar herself, That means we have 4 creatures that each got a counter, which is 1 or more counters, so this will trigger 4 times and we'll get 4 supply counters on it. Stocking the pantry can get an absurd number of counters and essentially unlimited number of counters without taking too long to get there. And then, if we pay 2 and remove a supply counter from it, we get to draw a card. So this is sort of like when you put 1 or more counters on a creature, you make a clue. We just don't get the artifact enters trigger or any ability to use those clues because they're all in the tree. But we can essentially crack the clue, any of the clues that are in this, these supply counters, to draw cards. So it's kind of like it makes clues for us. It plays a similar way, just without any of the artifact synergies or having other permanents center, that kind of thing. Stocking the pantry is great for these kinds of decks. Next we have Dusk Legion Duelist. This is 1 and a white for a 2/2 Vampire Soldier with Vigilance that says whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on this creature, draw a card, but only once each turn. So pure card draw every time we have a Felothar trigger, every time we put counters on this some other way. Just a nice reason to put counters on this Vigilant creature so that we get extra cards every turn. We've seen Diadrine. Diadrine lets us attack and then remove 1/1 counter from each of 2 creatures, and if we do, we get a 2/2 robot and we get to draw a card. Herd Heirloom is a Tarkir Dragonstorm card that, again, going up in price, it could use a reprint because it's very good. It's 1 and a green for an artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color that we can only spend on creature spells. We've got a lot of creatures in this deck, so this is a really nice 2 mana untapped mana rock that makes any color we need, albeit just for creatures. I've definitely tapped this during my testing of the deck to make red, so we can play Alesha. It's very good. We can also use this by tapping it, and until end of turn, a creature we control that has power 4 or greater will gain Trample and Curiosity. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we draw a card. So this is a nice effect we can put on our on Alesha, particularly. If Alesha is power 4 or greater already, and someone blocks Alesha with, a 1/1 servo token or something, they know that servo is going to die because Alesha has first strike, but they just don't want to take any damage. Well, after blocks, Alesha has 4 power or greater, so we activate the Herd Heirloom, give Alesha Trample as well, and so when she tramples over with her first strike, we're going to draw a card off of her. So yeah, very nice. But really, Herd Heirloom is just a terrific mana rock in this deck, as well as a source of evasion and card advantage. Next we have Key to the City. So good in this deck. 2 generic mana for an artifact that if we tap it and discard a card, up to 1 target creature can't be blocked this turn. A really great way to protect one of our commanders, particularly Alesha, and still get our attack triggers and our raid trigger at the end of turn, as well as discarding a card means putting a card in our graveyard, which means maybe putting a creature in our graveyard we want to reanimate with Alesha. And maybe it's something that we would have been able to bring back with Alesha early on because it's, a low mana value. Or maybe it's our Massacre Worm, so we don't even want to cast it. We don't need to worry about its triple black casting cost if we're discarding it when Alesha has enough power to reanimate it at our instep and get its trigger then. Key to the City is great for evasion and for filling our graveyard, and if we use it, it's tapped. And whenever it becomes untapped, if we pay 2, we draw a card. So just a nice way to put a new card in our hand to replace the one we discarded for just 2 mana. Nice. Brina, we've already seen. Brina gives us a card whenever we attack another opponent of ours, as long as that opponent isn't the opponent with the lowest life. In addition to putting 2 counters on one of our creatures. We also get those counters if one of our other opponents attacks a different one of our opponents, as long as it's not the opponent with the lowest life. Yeah. Lauren, we can tap so that we draw a card and one of our opponents does too. Morbid Opportunist is 2 and a black for a 1/3 human rogue that says whenever 1 or more other creatures die, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. Notably, it does not say other creatures you control. So if we kill an opponent's creature, if 2 opponents' creatures or an opponent's creature dies on a different player's turn, whatever it may be, only once each turn can we draw a card off of Morbid Opportunist, but we can often do it multiple times in a turn cycle because it may not be just one of our creatures. However, it sure can be. So whenever Felothar sacrifices one of our creatures, that comes with a card from Morbid Opportunist. And if when we put our counters on everything, we happen to have Dusk Legion Duelist in play, we'll get a counter from it too, when it gets that counter on it from Felothar. Neat. Next up, we've seen Celis already. In fact, we've seen all the rest of these. Celis gives us a card when she enters, even if we discard 0 other cards, but we can also discard as many as we want, and we'll get a replacement card for each of those too. Genova lets us draw cards equal to the power of a mutant we control when that mutant dies. Lenore draws us a card if, at the start of combat, after we put a 1/1 counter on one of our creatures, we have 3 or more creatures with different powers. The Sad Robot draws us a card when it dies, and the Combustible Gearhulk can draw us 3 cards or can put 3 cards in our graveyard and burn an opponent equal to the total mana value of those cards. It'll be that opponent's choice whether or not we draw or they want to get burned. Neat. That is our card advantage section. Let's go now to acceleration, which, as usual, I have tagged as ramp. We've got a little bit more acceleration than we often put in our decks because we've got 4 colors in this deck, and we want to be able to get them all out. So, Ignoble Hierarch is a single green for an 0/1 Goblin Shaman with Exalted. So whenever a creature we control attacks alone, it doesn't have to be the Hierarch itself, that creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. A little bit of pump, that's nice. And this little friend taps for Jund mana, a black, a red, or a green. Pretty good. This is a great little mana dork. Very easy to reanimate with Alesha. Pumps up our creatures, even if we only attack with just Alesha. That pump is not nothing. So yeah, pretty good. Obviously, we're running Soul Ring. This is a single generic mana for an artifact that taps for 2 colorless. Yeah, put this in basically every one of the decks you ever make. Like, it's just so good. It's so ubiquitous because it's so powerful. I personally don't have a problem with Soul Ring in Commander. But yeah, anyway, lots to say about this card, but don't really have to. It's just worth putting in your deck. We've seen the Studious First Year. It comes with a Rampant Growth staple to it. It's prepared when it enters, so there we go. Of course, we're also running Arcane Signet, 2 generic mana for an artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So in this deck, it taps for everything but blue. Great. That's a 2 mana untapped rock that makes one of our 4 colors. Of course, we're going to run this. Farseek is next. This is like an upgraded Rampant Growth. 1 and a green for a sorcery that lets us search our library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain, and put it on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. So obviously there's no islands in this deck, but we have plenty of plains, swamps, and mountains, and it does not say basic. So we can find a dual-typed land, if we have one, and put it into play tapped, which is great. We have a bunch of lands, like I mentioned, that have dual types, many of which can come in untapped, but if we just need that mana, we can go find whatever it is we need. If we're looking for something that can make white and black, we can find one of those. But what if we need green? Well, we have plains, swamps, and mountains, all of which that are on dual-typed lands, that also are forests. So we can find, a Cinderglade or something, which is a mountain forest. Great. Farseek finds whatever we need. Of course, we can also get basics with it. Felwar Stone is next. This is another 2 mana untapped rock that taps for 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. So this is great. Unless we are playing against a pod of players who are nothing but blue or colorless, this is going to make at least one of our colors. Obviously it's Commander. We're going to be playing against someone who's playing green. Come on. And green is our most populated color. Well, if someone's playing Mardu, then this makes 3 of our 4 colors. Great. It also works if someone's playing something like a Chromatic Lantern, which gives all their lands the ability to tap for any color. So that means Felwar Stone can tap for any color, since it makes any color that their lands can produce. Neat. We've seen the Herd Heirloom, taps for 1 mana of any color, only for creature spells, but again, we're running 42 creatures, and that includes our commanders. We have another mana dork in Incubation Druid. This is 1 and a green for an 0/2 Elf Druid that taps for 1 mana of any type that a land we control could produce. So this can't help us make mana of a color that we couldn't already make, but it does make more mana for us. And if it has a 1/1 counter on it, of any number, just any 1/1 counters, then we can add 3 mana of that type instead. So this gets better as the game goes on. Obviously, we're putting counters on it with Felothar or any of our other effects. And we can do that just to make it into a 3 mana producer rather than just 1. And it has Adapt 3 for 3 and double green, meaning we can pay 3 and double green and put 3 1/1 counters on it if it already has no counters. Adapt is a little strange. It only has an effect if the creature already has no counters on it. If it has any counters on it, we can still adapt it. It just won't put any counters on itself. So kind of strange, but it makes sense once you've played with it a couple of times. So if we happen to have plenty of mana and we just aren't hitting anything that can produce counters, then Incubation Druid can put counters on itself. Typically, though, we're not activating Adapt in this deck. We can get counters on this in other ways, especially from Felothar, who's in the command zone. Next up, I mentioned Steve already. We've got our own Sakura Trivelder. This is 1 and a green for a 1/1 Snake Shaman. So we do have a snake in this deck, remember that for a Fiomancer, but we can get it off of the battlefield if we need to, because it has a built-in sacrifice outlet. We sacrifice it in order to Rampant Growth. Search for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So Steve, terrific card in this deck. We play it, we sacrifice it to Felothar, we can bring it back with Alesha, whatever we need to do, or maybe we just are attacking with Alesha. Maybe Felothar's not in play yet, or we have something else to sacrifice to Felothar, whatever it may be. And Steve gives us a free Rampant Growth every turn if we're reanimating it with Alesha. So bring it back with Alesha, sack it again. Maybe sack it right away if we want to. You know, maybe we have a Mazarek in play and we want to surprise our opponents with a across-the-board pump. We sacrifice the Sakura Trivelder, which triggers Mazarek, which puts a counter on all of our creatures. We maybe do this in combat on an opponent's turn to surprise them. Plus, we get that land into play. Great. We've seen the Horizon Explorer. It can ramp us because it makes lander tokens every time we attack. So we can use those as Wayfarer's Baubles to continually Rampant Growth. Kami of Whispered Hopes is next. This is 2 and a green for a 1/1 spirit with Hardened Scales. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent we control, we put that many +1 on that permanent instead. Great. It's the same as our Conclave Mentor, almost the same. In this deck, it plays the same, basically. So it means whenever we get counters, we're going to get 1 more counter on each of those permanents that would get the counter. If we also have Conclave Mentor, we'll get a total of 3 for each one. Not really for each one. We'll get a total of +2 counters. We'll talk more about that when we get to the section that these are both in. Kami of Whispered Hopes also says if we tap it, we can add an amount of mana of any one color equal to its power. So if we activate we have Felothar trigger and we sacrifice something and put a counter on everything, Kami of Whispered Hopes is going to put an extra counter, which means it would get 1 counter, but because of its own ability, it's getting 2 counters, just like everything is, and now it can tap for 3 mana, since it has a power of 3. Great, love this card. I'm so glad that its price dropped since it was recently reprinted in Secrets of Strixhaven Commander. Yeah, Binding the Old Gods is next. This is another saga. For 2, a black and a green. Chapter 1 is destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls, so a great effect for removing something. Then, Chapter 2 is search your library for a forest, put it on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. It does not say basic, so we can find any of our forests that are dual typed. So unless we've already got it in play, or maybe we've milled the forest we're looking for, we get to find a forest that's either a basic or that is dual typed with the color we need most in that moment. It comes in tapped, but that's fine. Maybe we have our Horizon Explorer in play and it doesn't come in tapped. There you go. Finally, creatures we control gain Deathtouch until end of turn. This is so good for us because of the reasons I talked about with Deathtouch before. Felothar attacks with Deathtouch, and Felothar's a Deathtouch Trampler, doing lethal damage with just a single point and trampling over the rest of that damage. Alesha, also very good with Deathtouch, does first strike and Deathtouch damage, so unless Alesha is being blocked by a number of creatures Alesha's being blocked by more creatures than Alesha has power, then Alesha's not going to take any damage back unless those creatures themselves also had first strike, double strike, or I guess indestructible. Yeah. Plus all of our other creatures getting Deathtouch. Yeah, it's just a great way for us to swing in and probably not get blocked, or if we do, ensure that those blockers are probably dying. We've seen the Rampant Rejuvenator, great way to loop by sacrificing it and reanimating it and just continually getting more and more basics into play untapped. Solemn Simulacrum, rampant growths us when it enters, and the Earth King rampant growths us for each creature with power 4 or greater when those creatures attacks, as long as it's in play. Great. That covers our acceleration section. Let's talk now about our interaction section, which as usual I've just tagged as removal. As I often say, Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares are almost the same card. They're both a single white mana, they're both instants, and they both exile target creature and give that creature's controller a little kickback. Swords to Plowshares gives that creature's controller life equal to the creature's power, and Path to Exile lets that creature's controller rampant growth. So both of these are very strong cards. They're both white, they're both a single mana, they're both instant speed, and they're both unconditional creature removal, and they exile. So yeah, the kickback that they give is totally not as good as the effect that they have. So yeah, these are both worth putting in your deck. We are also running a Cursed Marauder. This is 1 and a black for a 2/1 zombie warrior. It's a warrior, for some reason, relevant later in the deck, that says when it enters, each player sacrifices a non-token creature of their choice. That does mean us too. So the usual way we do this is we sacrifice the Marauder itself. Then all of our opponents have to sacrifice something, and they can't sacrifice a token. So pretty good. We can also bring this back with Alesha at our end step and force everyone to do that same thing again. Maybe we sacrifice something other than the Marauder. Maybe the Marauder itself. Yeah, pretty good. We've seen Servandum. When Servandum dies while its power is 4 or greater, we get to destroy a non-land permanent. Easy for us to do. I mentioned Emergency Eject in passing earlier. I'm just going to give my little speech about Emergency Eject. I think this card is underplayed in Commander. This is 2 and a white for an instant that destroys a non-land permanent. So a 2 and a white instant that destroys a permanent that can hit lands, that's Generous Gift. But it gives them a 3/3 creature, or 3/3 green elephant creature token. Most of the people who are playing the power level of the decks that I make are playing in pods that don't want their lands messed with. They don't want to see any, not just mass land destruction, but any sort of land destruction or mana denial at all. And that's a fair way to play Commander. Not everyone's looking for that experience. Which means, why run Generous Gift when you could run Stroke of Midnight? They are both 2 and a white for an instant that destroys a permanent, but Stroke of Midnight gives them a 1/1 human rather than Generous Gift, which gives them a 3/3 elephant. The difference is Stroke of Midnight can't hit lands. It says non-land permanent. It has this same text. So it's just better if you're not going to destroy lands anyway. Which is why I say run Emergency Eject. Because rather than giving them a 1/1 creature, which it's not big, but they sure can block with it, and one of our 2 commanders, our one that we want to attack with more, Alesha, doesn't have trample innately. So why give them a blocker at all when we could destroy a non-land permanent and its controller creates a lander token? We've already been talking about landers. Landers are Wayfarer's Baubles. They have to pay 2 tap and sack it to rampant growth, which means Emergency Eject hits anything but lands for the same cost as Stroke of Midnight, or I guess Generous Gift, and the controller of that permanent has to pay mana in order to find a land which comes in tapped. So yes, it's not comparable to Path to Exile, which costs 2 less, exiles, and does that for them, but it does go rampant growth for them and only hits creatures. Emergency Eject costs 2 more, it's true, but can hit any non-land permanent, and it forces them to pay for the rampant growth effect. I'm not saying it's in any way as strong as Path to Exile, but Emergency Eject, you see the parallels I'm drawing. I think this card is really good. Again, I think it's underplayed. Yeah, I would put it in your deck. And if you're building this list, it's already in, so there you go. Lorna of the Third Path is a Reclamation Sage, destroys an artifact or enchantment when she enters. Next we have Annie Joins Up from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. 1, a red, a green, and a white, so a little bit mana intensive for us. It gives us a legendary enchantment that when it enters, it deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker that an opponent controls. So that is the removal effect of it. It's solid. 5 damage is not nothing. But the real reason it's in the deck is because if a triggered ability of a legendary creature you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. Imagine if Servandum is in play and has power 4 or greater and dies. Servandum is legendary, and that's a triggered ability, so we get to destroy 2 non-land permanents. Imagine if Annie Joins Up is in play and Lauren enters. Lauren enters and is legendary and has a triggered ability, and we destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment twice. We get the trigger both times. Most importantly with Annie Joins Up, we have 2 commanders with triggered abilities. Felothar enters or attacks, and we get to sacrifice something and put a counter on everything. When Felothar enters or attacks with any joins up in play, either of those events will trigger Felothar's ability. We get to sacrifice something, put a counter on everything, then do it again because it triggered twice. Even more cool, I think, is Alesha. Alesha attacks, and we get her put a counter on her trigger twice. So Alesha's going to attack and get 2 counters, just different triggers. And Alesha's raid trigger is another triggered ability. So we go to our end step, and Alesha gets to reanimate 2 target creatures with mana value no greater than her own power during our end step. Just, this does a lot for us in this deck, and in most decks that it goes in. Just a strong card. We've seen Binding the Old Gods. It lets us destroy a non-land permanent that an opponent controls. Similar to Emergency Eject, but we have to hit something an opponent controls. Emergency Eject can hit our own permanents. Just saying, if we're desperate for a lander token. Anyway, Ravenous Chupacabra enters and kills an opponent's creature, and Noxious Gearhulk does the same, and if that creature is destroyed, we get to gain life equal to its toughness. Nice. So those are our interactive spells. I've already mentioned both of the Wraths we're running. Massacre Worm comes in and gives -2/2 to all of our opponent's creatures, and Last Ronin, Chapter 1, is Destroy All Creatures. So pretty solid effects for us. I should also mention, speaking of Last Ronin and Binding the Old Gods, I guess, if you don't want this last chapter ability, while this is on Chapter 2, I guess, before the turn where it would get its 3rd ability, or its 3rd lore counter, this is an online permanent, so you can sure sacrifice this to Felothar. When Felothar attacks that turn, you'll miss out on the last chapter, but maybe that's fine with you. Maybe you would rather just get that trigger. It's particularly good with Binding the Old Gods, the last chapter of which does give everything Deathtouch, but maybe you don't care about that as much as you care about a counter on everything without losing a creature. So yeah, good options. Same is true, I guess, of the Last Ronin. Maybe you don't care about bringing a creature back, putting 3 counters on it, and giving it Trample, Lifelink, and Indestructible until their turn. Maybe you'd rather just get rid of it after milling. Or even after destroying all creatures, maybe? Play Felothar after that? I don't know, maybe not. But yeah, it's just a good option for you. And so that covers our Wraths, and therefore our support section. We're going to go over all the supplemental sections in our deck now, starting with our Payoffs. These are all cards that reward us for doing what we were going to do anyway. We've seen all but one of them. Oh, all but 2 of them, actually. So, Stocking the Pantry, whenever we put counters on our creatures, we get supply counters on the Stocking the Pantry, and we can draw cards from it. Great, we were going to put those counters on things anyway. Just like Dusk Legion Duelist, when we put counters on it, we get to draw a card once each turn. Evolution Witness is 2 and a green for a 2/1 Elf Shaman Mutant. It's a mutant, so Genova already cares when it dies, even without targeting it with Genova's Start of Combat trigger. And it has Adapt as well. For 1 and a green, we can adapt it too. So again, only if it has no counters on it can we activate this and get counters. We can activate it no matter what, it just won't do anything if it already has counters. And whenever 1 or more 1/1 counters are put on Evolution Witness, we get to get a permanent card from our graveyard and put it back in our hand. So this is a great reward for getting counters on this no matter how we do. Adapt, Felothar, Halana and Alena Partners, whatever it may be, similar to Dusk Legion Duelist, but it's not limited to just once each turn. Now we can only get back permanent cards, but we only have 1 sorcery and 3 instants in our library, so that's most of the cards in our deck. Nice. Scurry Oak pays us off when it gets counters on it as well, by giving us squirrels. Twilight Diviner pays us off when we have creatures enter from the graveyard, which is what Alesha is going to be trying to do every end step, so we get tokens of those. Celeste pays us off when we have creatures enter from the graveyard, similar to Twilight Diviner, and then puts a counter on each of our creatures when that happens. We've seen Mazarek. Mazarek triggers when we sacrifice things, which we're going to be doing to Felothar every turn, as much as we're able to, and puts extra counters on our things. But we haven't seen Carmen, Cruel Sky Marcher. This is 3, a white and a black for a 2/2 Legendary Vampire Soldier. So look at that. It's a black 5-mana 2/2 flyer, just like Mazarek. Carmen says, whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, we put a 1/1 counter on Carmen and we gain a life. So the same trigger as Mazarek, but with a different effect. It does put a counter on something, but it's only Carmen, but we gain life. And then when Carmen attacks, we return up to 1 target permanent card with mana value less than or equal to Carmen's power from our graveyard to the battlefield. That's sweet. a free reanimate just from attacking with Carmen, which, again, is us attacking. So even if we didn't attack with Alesha, we can go to our end step and Alesha's raid trigger will go off since we attacked that turn. But Carmen brings things back, and Carmen lets us bring back permanent cards, meaning any of our milling that we happen to have done, maybe from surveilling with Twilight Diviner, or discarding things from Celeste, which is not mill, but you understand, or any of our things that actually do mill, like with our 6-mana Saga Wrath, Carmen can get those things back, even if they're not creatures, including lands, because obviously lands are mana value 0. So yeah, Carmen can really help us out with Recursion in a similar way to Alesha, but a little bit more powerfully, just also more expensively. That is our payoff section. We next have a section I've called Extras. We've seen all but 2 of these so far. So these are all the cards that give us a little bit more of what we were already doing. For example, Conclave Mentor and Kami Whispered Hopes don't have exactly the same text, because Conclave Mentor only cares about creatures, Kami cares about permanents, but they both have essentially hardened scales, which says whenever we put 1/1 counters on something, any amount of them, we put 1 more. So if we have both in play, both of these replacement effects are going to happen, and we're going to put a total of 2 more on something, or on everything we would be putting counters on. Yeah. Cursed Wombat, interestingly, does not work the same way, but works in a similar way. A black and a green for a 2/3 Nightmare Wombat with Adapt 2 for 2 a black and a green. So we can put counters on this, making it into a 4/5 for just 4 mana on its own, but like I mentioned with the other Adapt creatures, most of the time we're just relying on Felothar or any of our other counters cards to put counters on things rather than spending our mana to adapt it. And Cursed Wombat gives all of our permanents a triggered ability. It says whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on this permanent, we put an additional 1 on it, but it triggers only once each turn. So it seems like this is the same thing as Hardened Scales, because, Conclave Mentor says if we put any 1/1 counters on it, we get an extra one. Cursed Wombat says whenever we put 1/1 counters on it, we get an extra one. That's not true. This is a replacement effect. This is a triggered ability. So if we were to say, have Halana and Elena partners, put 2 1/1 counters on the Conclave Mentor, Conclave Mentor will see that and will change that event to putting 3 counters on it, because it's 2 plus that 1, additional 1. But if we have Cursed Wombat in play as well, what's going to happen is Conclave Mentor will get 3 counters on itself and then trigger the ability that Cursed Wombat gives it, which is whenever 1 or more counters are put on this permanent, we put an extra 1. It says whenever 1 or more counters are put on it, then put an extra 1 on it. Meaning Conclave Mentor will get 3 counters for Halana and Elena, and then 2 additional counters as a second event, because Cursed Wombat's giving it the ability to put 1 more counter on itself, but whenever you would put a counter on it, it puts 1 more. So with both of these in play, Halana and Elena putting 2 on the Conclave Mentor turns into 3, triggers Cursed Wombat's ability that it gives Conclave Mentor, and puts 2 more for a total of 5. So Cursed Wombat is written in such a way so that the ability it confers is only triggering once per permanent per turn, but it works with Hardened Scales effects like Conclave Mentor and Kami Whispered Hopes, since it's only putting an extra counter on, but it's putting it on as an additional event, which is also modifiable by replacement effects like these 2. So pretty sweet. The way I explained it there is probably the way it is best to explain it to your friends when you're like, okay, trigger here, get some extra counters, trigger again, get additional counters. I'm like, wait, where's that extra trigger coming from? And why is it getting even more counters? Well, Cursed Wombat, it works a little differently. Thanks, Modern Horizons 3, for being weird. Windscrag Siege is in this section because it gives us an extra trigger whenever we have attack triggers happen. Annie joins up, gives us extra triggers whenever our legendary creatures have triggered abilities triggering. So yeah, extra triggers for both of those. And last in the section, we have All Out Assault. This is 2, a red, a white, and a black, so another one of these 3 mana, kind of more difficult to cast cards, but works okay in our deck. It's an enchantment that gives all of our creatures +1/+1 and Deathtouch. So I've already mentioned a couple of times why Deathtouch is so good with our commanders, and just in general with our creatures. It is a little bit of an extra thing to remember, to have to remember that all of our creatures have +1/+1 in addition to their power and toughness that's printed on them, and in addition to whatever counters they have, since this is not a counter, it's just a static effect. But getting that extra bonus helps Alesha with reanimating things, and Deathtouch helps all of our creatures, especially our commanders. And when All-Out Assault enters, if it's our main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase, followed by an additional main phase, and when you attack this turn, untap each creature you control. So this is a really powerful effect. It's an extra combat effect, which I don't normally put in my decks, but it's more than that too. It means if this is our pre-combat main phase, we get an extra combat phase, and when we attack in that, we untap all of our creatures. Then we go to our extra main phase. Then we move to our regular combat phase, and if we attack in that, it says when you next attack this turn, we're not going to untap our things the second time because it's just next attack. But any of our creatures that didn't attack during the first combat, I'm saying it the wrong way. We want to attack with as many things as we can the first time we attack, because it's going to untap all of our creatures, even the ones that were tapped some other way. Like, for example, our mana dorks, like our Ignoble Hierarch, might be able to untap with that. So, first main phase, we cast this, we get a combat phase, and then an extra main phase, then our regular combat phase, and our regular second main phase, or our regular post-combat main phase. Similarly, if we cast this during our second main phase, maybe we had our first main phase, we went to combat, we attacked, we got all of our triggers from Felothar and Alesha and any of our other creatures, and we've got a bunch of tapped creatures. Second main phase, we play All-Out Assault. We know we're going to have an extra combat phase and an extra main phase after this current main phase. We go into our now second combat phase, and as long as we attack with anything, we untap everything. So we get to do our combat again if we wish to, or just send one of our tokens to combat, untap all of our creatures, including that token, and then we get an extra main phase on top of that afterwards, after that combat phase. So we get to use our mana dorks again. We get to use our creatures that have tap abilities, and so forth. Yeah, All-Out Assault is very nice. 5 mana for an enchantment should be, but even just this is not worth 5 mana, but it's good on its own, especially with this staple to it. Great. That covers our extras section. Now, we've been talking about getting things in our graveyard, so we have a bunch of ways to do that. We've already seen Stitcher Supplier. It lets us mill whenever it enters and dies. We mill 3. Hajar, Loyal Bodyguard, is a red and a green for a 3/3 legendary human soldier that says if we sacrifice him, all of our legendary creatures get +1/+0 and indestructible until end of turn. So a solid card for us to sacrifice just to himself to pump up Alesha and pump up Felothar and pump up, Lauren, Servandum, any of our other legendary creatures whose power matter. And of course to just protect them. But we can also sacrifice Hajar just to Felothar. We won't get Hajar's effect, but we do get that counter on everything, and then we go to combat. Whether or not we attacked with Alesha will trigger at our end step if she's on the battlefield, and we'll be able to get Hajar back. And since Hajar can be sacrificed at instant speed without paying any mana or tapping him, therefore on any turn, even turns where he's got summoning sickness, we bring him back during our end step, and we're set during the remaining the remainder of that turn cycle. If our opponent's having to play a board wipe, we just sacrifice Hajar. All of our legends get to stay in play, assuming that board wipe wasn't a bounce-based one or an exile effect. If it was like a Wrath of God, all of our legends get indestructible, so we're protected. We just go to our next turn, go to the end step again, reanimate Hajar with Alesha. Great. We've seen Key to the City. It lets us tap it and discard a card to make something unblockable. Discarding a card puts something in the graveyard. Sakura Tribe Elder puts itself in the graveyard when we sack it to Rampant Growth. Cauldron of Essence is a new, as of time of recording, Secrets of Strixhaven card. This is 1 a green and a black, or 1 a black and a green rather, for an artifact that says whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So it's kind of a Blood Artist as a pot, So a nice way to do a little bit more drain or burn, whatever you want to call it, and incidental life gain whenever we're sacrificing things to Felothar, having things die in combat, whatever it may be. In addition, we can pay 1 a black and a green, tap the cauldron and sack a creature to return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield at sorcery speed. So one more way to reanimate things. We can get rid of something small and get anything else back. So we get back maybe, again, our Massacre Worm. And it, again, sacrifices something, so it's putting something in the graveyard. We can just get back with Alesha. That's kind of the whole point, if I didn't already mention, about putting things in the graveyard in this section. It's that in our command zone, we have a once per turn reanimate effect. So as long as we attacked, and we will. So yeah, that's what helps us there. We've seen the Twilight Diviner. It does give us tokens when we bring something back from the graveyard, but it's in this section because it surveils 2. It lets us put things in the graveyard if we need to. Similarly, Celeste is in this section and gives us triggers when things leave our graveyard or enter from our graveyard, but lets us discard cards in order to draw more, and so puts things in our graveyard. We've seen the Last Ronin. It has us mill. That's why it's in this section, so you know. And the reason we have Sir Conrad in this section is, well, if you know Sir Conrad, you already know where I'm going. This is a 5/4 legendary human knight for 3 and double black that says Sir Conrad deals 1 damage to each opponent when one of 3 things happen. Either any creature dies, doesn't matter if it's a token, doesn't matter who controls it. When another creature dies, Sir Conrad deals a damage to each opponent. Or if a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, Sir Conrad deals a damage to each opponent. So between these two, it means if a creature enters a graveyard, Sir Conrad deals a damage to each opponent. Great. Finally, if a creature leaves our graveyard, Sir Conrad deals 1 damage to each opponent. Only cares about our, like, whose graveyard it is for this third qualifier, but it's 3 different ways that Sir Conrad can trigger and do a damage to each opponent, which is more burn. So pretty great. Sir Conrad's in this section, however, because if we pay 1 and a black, everyone mills a card, and that includes us. So it's 1 more way for us to put something in our graveyard. And when everyone mills, that might mean creature cards are put into graveyards from anywhere other than the battlefield, so Sir Conrad will trigger. Yeah, so a very nice way to burn our opponents, and an annoying card with a big reputation, which means Sir Conrad might be removal bait, meaning our commanders are not getting hit, Sir Conrad's getting hit. Nice. Or rewards us for, sacrificing things to Felothar. That means creatures died, or a creature died, so we get to burn everyone. We attack, maybe creatures die in combat, we get to burn everyone. Good times. So that covers our graveyard section. Next, we've been talking about death triggers. Let's go over the ones that we have in this deck. We've seen all of them now. Servandum, when any other creatures die or are put into exile, we get a counter on Servandum and we gain a life. And when Servandum dies, we get to destroy an online permanent if Servandum's power is 4 or greater. Cauldron of Essence, when a creature we control dies, each opponent loses a life and we gain a life. Morbid Opportunist, once per turn, whenever any creature dies, we draw a card, and that's not just our turns. Genova, when mutants we control die during our turn, we draw cards equal to that mutant's power. And Sir Conrad, when any creatures die anytime or go to the graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or one of our creature cards leaves our graveyard, Sir Conrad burns each opponent for 1. Fine, those are our death triggers. But we also care about Deathtouch, which is right here. We've seen all but one of these. These are cards, I've mentioned several times why Deathtouch is so good for us, particularly for our commanders. Agent of the Shadow Thieves gives our commanders Deathtouch, a counter, and indestructible when they attack, if they're attacking an opponent that has the most life or is tied for the most life. Binding the Old Gods gives all of our creatures Deathtouch until end of turn at its 3rd chapter ability, and All Out Assault gives all of our creatures +1/+1 and Deathtouch all the time. Falthus, Shadowcat Familiar, is 2 and a black for a 2/2 legendary Nightmare Cat. It's legendary, it's fine, and gives our commanders both Menace and Deathtouch, and has Partner, which is not relevant in this deck, but nice to know. So this cat makes both of our commanders Deathtouchers, so a Death-touching First Striker and a Death-touching Trampler, and gives them both Menace, so that's additional evasion. So Deathtouch, First Strike, and Menace, that's essentially, do you want to sacrifice 2 creatures in order to prevent Alesha from damaging you? And if we have some way to give Alesha Trample on top of that, come on. So that is our Deathtouch section. Next up, let's look at the other ways that we have evasion. So Falthus is in this section, of course. Gives our commanders Menace. Last Ronin gives the creature that we reanimate 3 counters, trample, lifelink, and indestructible. Dust Shell Crawler gives all of our creatures with counters with 1/1 counters on them, trample. Herd Heirloom can give a creature power 4 or greater, trample, and curiosity. Key to the City, we can activate and discard a card to make a creature unblockable. And Abzan Falconer is 2 and a white for a 2/3 human soldier with Outlast for a single white, meaning at sorcery speed we can pay a white and tap the Falconer to put a counter on it. And each creature we control with a 1/1 counter on it has flying. So flying, Deathtouch, Menace, First Strike, trample, all these good things going together. Even just giving Alesha flying is so strong in this deck. So yeah, the Falconer has a great place for us right here. That is our Evasion section. Let's look now at the cards that give us some protection. We've seen all but one of these. Agent of the Shadow Thieves with our commanders, as long as they're attacking the opponent or opponents that have or are tied for the most life, they get a counter, Deathtouch, and Indestructible until end of turn. Hajar can be sacrificed to give our legendary creatures +1/+0 and Indestructible until end of turn. Brina disincentivizes our opponents from attacking us, so that's a little bit of protection because it gives them the ability to draw a card. The Last Ronin can give Indestructible as well as Trample and Lifelink at 3 1/1 counters to whatever creature we use it to reanimate with its 3rd chapter. And finally in this section we have the Swifties. Swiftfoot Boots is 2 generic mana for an equipment that equips for 1 and gives the equipped creature Hexproof and Haste. Haste can be really good with these, but we really want to give Alesha or Felothar Hexproof. Saves them from things. The boots are here to help us keep our commanders alive and on the battlefield and attacking. So there we go. That is our protection section. Next up, we have seen all the different ways we can recur things. I just wanted to collect them right here. Obviously, Alesha recurs things. Cauldron of Essence can give us a sack outlet that reanimates a creature. Evolution Witness puts permanents back in our hand every time, from our graveyard that is, every time it gets counters on it. Carmen, when Carmen attacks, gets to reanimate something that is a permanent card, mana value less than or equal to Carmen's power from the graveyard to the battlefield. Smile at Death, at the start of our upkeep, returns up to 2 creature cards, power 2 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield, and puts a 1/1 counter on each of them. And the Last Ronin can reanimate a creature. For its 2nd chapter ability, has us mill 4 and then returns a creature card from our graveyard to our hand. So another Raise Dead like the Evolution Witness gives us. That is our Recursion section. Next, we've talked about burn a little bit. Here are the 4 ways we can do it. Cauldron of Essence, when we have creatures die, each opponent loses a life. Sir Conrad, we meet one of these 3 qualifications. Sir Conrad does damage to each opponent, just 1. Combustible Gearhulk, if our opponent chooses to not let us draw 3 cards, we're going to mill 3 cards, and they're going to take damage equal to the total mana value of those cards. And Massacre Worm makes each opponent lose 2 life whenever one of their creatures dies. So that's our burn section. The last section in our spells is our pump section. These are all cards that make our creatures a little bigger in a way that's not counters. Ignoble Hierarch makes a creature that attacks alone get +1/+1 until end of turn with its Exalted ability. Hajar can give all of our legendary creatures +1/+0 and Indestructible when we sacrifice him to his ability. And All Out Assault gives all of our creatures +1/+1 and Deathtouch. And that covers all of the spells in our deck. As usual, we're going to go over our land base now, starting with our basic lands. This is going to seem like a strange balance for the kind of cards that we have in our deck, but it works out very, very well. We have more production of all these colors, in all these colors, than we need strictly. We are running a little bit more green than we are black, or significantly more green, really, but we wanted to make sure we have plenty of black production because both of our commanders are both in black. And I never like to go below 2 basics in any of the colors of our deck because you never know what you're going to mill and then need to ramp growth into. So if we're having to search for, at least 1 red source to be able to play Alesha, I don't want to have accidentally milled the only mountain in my library. So that's why I'm running a minimum of 1 or a minimum of 2 of each of those. So yeah, this is a good balance that works out well for us. If you want to cut things a little closer or run more premium ramp, I guess, you could definitely cut 6 of these and put all the pain lands in. And that would be a great way to have some untapped duels in this deck and fix your mana even better. I just wanted to make sure I had plenty of access to basics because I have so many ramp effects that find specifically basic lands. We are running all 6 check lands. This is another great reason not to run untyped duels. So the check lands are like this. Rootbound Crag, for example, taps for red or green, so all of these tap for one of 2 colors, and all of them enter tapped unless we control either a mountain or a forest, which is to say a land that has the either type of the color associated with the colors that it taps for. So for example, Isolated Chapel makes white and black, and it needs us to have a Plains or a Swamp in play in order to come in untapped. So we have 16 basics, so we've got lots of ways to have those, but it does not, for any of these, say a basic land. So Woodland Cemetery, as long as we have a non-basic swamp or non-basic forest, or a basic swamp or forest, it'll come in untapped. So these are pretty great as a way to have what it is very, very often in this deck, an untapped duel come in, as you'll see the reason for soon. If you wanted to upgrade these, the slow lands would be a great upgrade, several of which have dropped in price because they're getting reprinted right now at time of recording in Secrets of Strixhaven, and I bet you we're going to get the allied color ones in Reality Fracture later this year. So yeah, the slow lands would be a great upgrade, but also are more expensive. Next we have our 5 fixing lands. We're obviously running Command Tower. This is a land that comes in untapped and has the same text as Arcane Signet. It taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity, so in this deck it taps for white, black, red, or green. An untapped quad land? Yes, obviously, put this in your deck. Similarly, Path of Ancestry comes in tapped and has that same text as Command Tower, so it's a tapped quad land. Still very good. Also, it says when we use its mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we get to scry one. Both of our commanders are human warriors, so that's 2 creatures already, since obviously they share creature types with themselves. We have 12 additional humans in this deck, and 1 other card, Accursed Marauder, which is a warrior. So that's a total of 15 of our cards in this deck that get us a scry off a Path of Ancestry. Great. Plus, it's a tapped quad land. We want that. Similarly, we have Exotic Orchard. This is an untapped land that taps for 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. So if Command Tower is the land version of Arcane Signet, this is the land version of Fellwar Stone, which we're also running. Everything I said about the Fellwar Stone is just as true here. It's also the case that if an opponent has an Exotic Orchard, then their Exotic Orchard sees our other lands, which means our Exotic Orchard sees their orchard, and so our Exotic Orchard taps for 1 mana of any color that our lands can produce as well. Pretty nice. For our fetch, we're running Blighted Woodland. This is a land that comes in untapped, taps for colorless, and we can pay 3 and a green, tap and sack it to Explosive Vegetation. Search for 2 basics, put them on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. Oftentimes in my decks, I like to run Myriad Landscape for my sort of slow fetch 2 lands, so we're playing 1 land as a land drop, and we're getting 2 lands into play, and it fixes our mana a little bit. Blighted Woodland does take longer to sacrifice because it requires 4 mana to do so, but it comes in untapped rather than like Myriad Landscape, and it can find 2 basics that don't have to be the same type, so it can fix our mana when we really need it to. I think this is a solid include for this deck, especially since we've got green in our deck. Finally, I know not everyone likes Temple of the False God, but for the budget of these decks that I build, I think it's very strong. This is an untapped land that taps for 2 colorless mana. It's a soul land. It's just we can't activate it at all unless we control 5 or more lands total, which means 4 other than the temple itself. So this is acceleration, just not early acceleration. We are not going to be able to use this if our opening hand is a mountain, a Temple of the False God, and no other mana sources or ramp pieces. You probably want to mulligan that. But if you get this out as your 5th land, then you're jumping from 4 mana production to 6, at least, assuming you didn't have like mana dorks in addition. And that's helpful for us, you know? Even acceleration is best early game, but even though this only really works mid or late game, that doesn't mean acceleration stops being useful. So yeah, there we go. I'm running all 6 of the Tango lands in our colors. Tango lands are lands that tap for 1 of 2 colors and enter tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands. So we have 16 basics for a reason and a lot of effects that find basics for us. So it's pretty unlikely, or it's pretty likely, I should say, that mid to late game, our Tango lands come in as untapped duels. In addition, The Tango lands tap for one of two colors because they have two types. These are the typed duels we're running for this deck. So Canopy Vista is a Forest Plains, meaning if we've got check lands, like Isolated Chapel, it comes in untapped if we have a Plains or a Swamp. Well, if we have a Canopy Vista, we have a Plains. So now we can play that Isolated Chapel untapped. So the way these interact with those check lands is great, and it means with our 16 basics and our 6 tangos, we've got 22 cards in our deck that have basic types, which means we can have our check lands be much more likely to come in untapped. Plus, when we Farseek, or anything else that can find basic typed lands that does not say, or can find typed lands that don't say a basic land, like Farseek, for example, Farseek can find any of these lands. It can find a swamp, so it can find a Vernal Fen, which maybe gives us access to the green mana that we need. Yeah, pretty good. If you would want to upgrade these, I might say the Shocklands. They're much more expensive, obviously, but they're always going to enter untapped if you pay the 2. So yeah, I think the Tango lands are, because they're so inexpensive, a great inclusion in this deck, though. They work just fine for me. We're running all 4 Tri-lands as well. Tri-lands are simply tap lands that tap for 3 different colors. So all of them make all but one of our colors, and so it's a lot of coverage between them. Yeah, not everything is going to be able to be a quad land like Command Tower or a tapped quad land like Path of Ancestry, but these tapped Tri-lands are very good for fixing our mana. If you want to upgrade them, the Triomes are so much more expensive, but you could certainly do that. And yeah, there we go. Last, we're running a single utility land, and it's Demolition Field. You remember that diatribe I did for Emergency Eject? In these kinds of decks, for the pods that these decks want, or the pods that want these kind of decks, like I mentioned, people don't necessarily want land destruction. However, putting a single answer to problematic non-basics in your deck is not too much, especially if it's something like Demolition Field, because the examples I normally give are, what if your opponent is running a Voltron deck and their commander is huge and they've got a Rogue's Passage, making their commander unblockable, and so you can't do anything about it and you're going to lose to that. Or your commander's running a Glacial Chasm, like a friend of mine likes to run, so that your combat-based deck is not able to do damage to them. In that case, those non-basic lands are something that is accelerating or empowering their game plan a lot, or it's shutting down our own game plan. In which case, we need to answer those lands, and having a one of answer to a land in your deck, anyone's going to be like, well, okay, it's only one of, maybe you don't draw it, and if you happen to draw it, then great, you got it. Demolition Field is even better in terms of that sort of like idea of fairness than that, because this is an untapped land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap, and sack it to destroy a non-basic land an opponent controls, and that opponent then gets to search for a basic land and put it on the battlefield untapped. And so do we. So neither we nor they are down a land, even though we sacked our demo field and they lost their non-basic. We both have an untapped basic land, assuming we've had basics left in our libraries. And so we haven't denied anyone their mana, assuming their land wasn't making more than 2 mana, obviously. As long as we're using this not in a way that's sort of jerkbaggy, like, oh, you've got a 3-color deck and you've only got one source of your red or something? Well, we're going to take you off your red with that red dual land you've got. If we're just using this as an answer to a problematic non-basic, there's going to be very few pods that understand that Magic is a game of threats and answers who will have a problem with that, especially, again, as a one-of. So that covers Demolition Field, and that sums it up. Again, while scheduled Pride events are already over for the month, nothing stops you from playing this as a Rule Zero deck, especially during June. And I recommend it. I had a lot of fun building this deck, and it's super fun to play. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you want to support what I do here, make sure to like and subscribe. Ring the bell if you want to be notified when my videos go live. Consider joining my Patreon at patreon.com/secondmonitormagic or becoming a member of this channel on YouTube. And remember that Magic is fun. You should play more Magic.